battlegrounds of the Second War, and the British appeared to be outgunned.
After the defeat of France, the Italian Navy came into the war with the Italians, and they had a very large and pretty efficient sort of a fleet. By comparison, the Royal Navy was very weak. Admiral Cunningham, who was a fine and resourceful commander, had only 3 cruisers and 5 pretty old Australian destroyers, which became famous as the Scrap Iron Flotilla. The Royal Navy sent reinforcements to help Cunningham. One of them was HMAS Sydney, commanded by Captain Collins, and the other HMAS Hobart.
The Australians were soon in action alongside the Royal Navy at the Battle of Calabria. Then, on the 19th of July, HMAS Sydney came upon the Italian cruisers Giovanni del Bandiniera and the Bartolomeo Colleoni. Sydney's Captain Collins had lured the Italians into a deadly trap.
I was a leading seaman gunner at the time, and my job was to open the breech so that they could ram the shells in and arm the breech with the igniter cap, and then close it and make it ready for the next round when that was fired. And I don't know who got the greatest shot, the British destroyers or the Italian cruisers. On our third salvo, we scored a hit on the Italian flagship, the Giovanni del Bandiniera, which caused some consternation to the Italians because the edict in the Italian Navy in those days, put out by Mussolini and his people, was that at all costs the Italians had to protect their ships, and if it meant turning away and fighting another day, that was what they did. So having scored that hit on the flagship, the Italian flagship, that sort of altered the course of the action. The Italians turned away and started to run.
The chase was on, with the Italians some 16 kilometers ahead of the Australians. The Colleoni in the rear became the main target. Fire was continued on the 2 cruisers until a shell from Sydney exploded in the Colleoni's boiler room, stopping the ship. 545 Italian sailors were captured, and the Bartolomeo Colleoni sunk.
The loss of the Bartolomeo Colleoni was a sharp reverse for the Italians, the Italian Navy in the Mediterranean, and Mussolini was reported to be very gloomy at the result of the combat. It was not so much because they'd lost a ship, but because he felt that the Italians hadn't fought very well or brilliantly in that action. After that, the Italians tended to keep within the harbour, in spite of the very strong patrolling by British and Australian ships. Because they kept in harbour, Cunningham decided to go after them, and he hit them at Taranto. And Taranto, the results of that was amounted to a major strategic victory, naval victory in the Mediterranean.
Collins and his jubilant crew were justifiably proud. It was one bright spot in an otherwise gloomy period of the war. The AIF 6th Division, after their victories against the Italians in North Africa, were sent against the Germans in Greece. It was an ill-conceived campaign from the start, and the Australians were soon in full retreat, the Navy their only hope. Most of the troops were evacuated to the island of Crete, but once again, retreat was inevitable.
I'd been for just on a week with no food and no sleep. You're just virtually exhausted by this time. And we'd lost faith with our own officers, but we knew the Navy. I mean, if it was into the Navy, we knew that we were pretty right. I mean, like, they had this experience, and I mean, they had the knowledge and this sort of thing, so we weren't worried too much. The whole thing was to get away from them. It was the middle of the night, something 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I think it was, something like that. You know, waiting on Kalamata Beach. When suddenly out of the gloom and doom came this voice from a naval officer. I am a naval officer, and I am in charge of this beach in very crisp, what would you say, no nonsense voice. And he had that beach under control in a matter of minutes.
The Navy ran a desperate shuttle service between Crete and North Africa. Though the troops were picked up under cover of dark, the dawn would bring the inevitable air attacks as the ships made their run for safety. The Australian destroyer HMAS Napier was to make one of the last runs into Crete.
I've never forgotten this one. We passed the other team coming out, cruisers, and amongst it was the Australian destroyer Stuart. She tried to come with us, but they said no, she was to stay with that team, and they told us later they never expected to see us again. Thank goodness we didn't know it, but we went on, and luckily that night, where there were some landing craft left behind by those people, and we were able to get on board approximately 1,700 people into the two destroyers this time. We shot off, and very shortly after 9 o'clock we were heavily bombed. In Napier we were brought to a standstill and eventually got under way again, but we finally had to be towed through the breakwater at Alexandria.
Across the Mediterranean, the Australian 9th Division, the Rats of Tobruk, had been holding out against vastly superior German and Italian forces. Their backs to the sea, they endured month after month of attacks. Ammunition, food and water always in short supply. It was up to the Navy to carry in all supplies and evacuate the wounded. The famed Tobruk ferry run became one of the most hazardous tasks undertaken in the Mediterranean. Altogether, Australian destroyers made 139 runs into Tobruk, and several ships were lost.
To get into Tobruk, you had to pick up the oil lights of a sunken trawler. They'd been taken out and put up as lead lights, and they were very hard to find. Having got them, you then got inside, weaved your way through the wrecks and went to wherever you'd been asked to berth. And the idea was to try and beat every other destroyer in the time taken to get discharged approximately 90 tons of cargo. I think we won it hands down in Nizam. But once we got out, we used to pour on the speed and get away as fast as we could, because it was felt that that was owed to the wounded who were coming on board, and it eventually, of course, to the fact that the division was being relieved, and we used to take up their reliefs and bring out the 9th Division.
From all over Australia, young men are travelling to join the crew of the HMAS Cerberus, the ship that never goes to sea. Any day now, the German Admiralty may be expected to announce they've sunk her. HMAS Cerberus is the Navy's name for Flinders Naval Depot, where youth is trained to take its place in Australia's young fleet. A fleet barely 30 years old, but already rich in tradition, with the stars of many victories emblazoned on its battle flag. The Emden, Bartolomeo Colleone, the North Sea, the Mediterranean, and victories yet to come.
Boots heavy, boots light, shoes gymnastics, shoes white canvas, one collar blue jeans, brush shaving, brush blacking, brush polishing, brush clothes, brush hair, brush tooth.
They haven't overlooked a thing. It's a way they have in the Navy. And there's the bugle. From now on, it governs their lives. It's the bugle to get up. Goodbye to feather beds.
Big sprint, big sprint. Start the pole. Keep it going all the way down. Close your hands. Pick it up. Where are you going to win? There.
Come on, this one over here. Right, 60 in front of it.
1D, catch her up. You can do it. Last move all the way down.
Sit down. Get up. Sit down. Stay up.
A lot of my friends just thought I was mad for going in. They couldn't understand that it was what I wanted. They were just looking at it from their point of view.
If you do the right thing, you don't get yelled at, obviously. You know, it's just a matter of just sort of taking what they say. You've got to take it.
When I first got here, all I wanted to do was go home. First night I was really homesick, and all I wanted to do was go home. And then when you settle in and you get used to the life and used to the people and the instructors, you sort of settle down and you feel a lot better and then start getting on with what's most important to you.
You've been in the same class, so you should have things folded the same way. I.e., have a look at his underpants, have a look at your underpants. Different folding, right? Let's pick out a white front. What's that? Dirt PO.
Dirt PO.
Grime, rubbish, muck.
If you don't take it, you get in more trouble, you know. You can't just turn around and tell them off because it's just not on. You got to sort of switch off really for about 12 weeks until you get through here.
Discipline, the underlying keynote of all their training. But it's a democratic discipline that the men understand and appreciate. No matter what branch of the Navy they join, their first training is in seamanship. They join the Navy to see the world. And what'll they see? Well, they'll see the sea. And they're glad of it. In cutters and whalers, the veriest landlubber soon feels he's the ancient mariner himself.
Well, stand by to tackle, going. Ready, port? Lead it off there, please. Leo.
We all pull together when we need to. We did a survival at sea, and there was a lot of the girls who really panicked when they first hit the water, and the guys were fantastic. They just, you know, really helped, and we all just stuck together, and now they just treat us as one of the boys. And we get on really well now.
To your front, 8 target will appear. Watch and shoot.
I think probably the way women's equal rights are going, that we probably will end up in combat roles.
Today, women are almost completely integrated into Navy life. All basic training assumes no bias as to sex.
Just watch your Taliban, it's just starting to slip down. Bring it up above the rim of your cap there.
You see.
Okay, just tighten it up a bit.
I joined the Navy because I know that they need people like us. I mean, maybe we don't go on board a ship right now, but while the men are away, somebody has to look after the shore establishments, and that's the main reason why I joined.
Two RAN ships, HMAS Jarvis Bay and the survey ship HMAS Cook, have female crew members.
It's not a 8 till 4 job. It's all around the clock, the whole 24 hours.
Whiskey 2, this is Juliet 2, over.
Roger. Now for us to close up, sir.
Whiskey 2, this is Juliet 2. Execute to follow. Corpin for par, 270. Tack, speed, 10. Over.
It's not like I thought it'd be, but I still love it. It's completely different to anything you know. Now you know why when the guys come off the ships and come onto a land base, they say, oh, the girls get it so easy. Well, now we know why, because at sea you're always working.
Whiskey 2, this is Juliet 2. Roger, out.
Roger, out.
By 1941, the RAN had 68 ships in commission, and its 20,000 sailors were stretched to the limit. The Women's Royal Australian Naval Service was formed to relieve men for active duty.
We have the fondest memory of working with the men and the men whom we relieved. But they were keen to get to sea. It was wartime, and they had no desire to spend it in a shore depot. And the men even got to the stage where they could recognise the individual Rans Morse, and you know, we kept in touch with them over those 4 years. And the thing that stood out in my mind was when HMAS Sydney was lost. There was, nothing was heard, and every girl, I'm sure, wondered, did I miss the message?
In February 1941, HMAS Sydney had returned to Australian waters from her victorious tour of duty in the Mediterranean. she was greeted by politicians and the public alike as a conquering hero. Captain Collins was relieved by Captain Burnett, and Sydney sailed into the Indian Ocean. Tragically, these men and their gallant ship were never seen again. Sydney was lost with all hands in mysterious circumstances.
I still can't believe that that happened to my ship. My friends, my colleagues, the men that I drank with and fought with in the Mediterranean, that they all went like that. I just can't bring myself to accept it as a person who served in that ship.
Sydney had encountered the heavily armed and disguised German raider Cormoran. In circumstances yet to be fully explained, both ships were sunk, Sydney with all her men.
The German raider Cormoran was under false Dutch colours, and Sydney approached fairly closely to within about 2 kilometres. No doubt because the ship was not was disguised as a friendly ship. Suddenly, Cormoran dropped its disguise and opened a devastating fire, and the ensuing battle, a very savage battle, both ships were crippled and eventually sunk.
315 of Cormoran's 393 crew survived the engagement and were rescued. The discovery of these survivors set off a frantic search for Sydney's crew. None were ever found.
There was a tragic irony in the fact that Sydney had served through months of arduous operations in the Mediterranean and had not suffered one casualty. But in the fight with Cormoran, in stark contrast, not one man survived.
HMAS Sydney's loss was a devastating blow to Australia. It was to be the first of many to come. For now, the war was drawing closer to home. On December the 7th, 1941, Japan entered the war and struck south. Suddenly, Australia looked imperiled. HMAS Perth was sunk in the Sunda Strait, and the Japanese looked invincible. Then, a combined American and Australian force turned them back in the Coral Sea. While this was mainly an aerial battle between American and Japanese carriers, RAN ships played a major diversionary role. And for many young sailors, it would be their first taste of action.
The captain came to the public address system from the bridge and announced augmented damage control parties close up. Okay, I'd never heard of such a call or an instruction coming to a ship. I was brand new. Asked the fellow alongside me, what does augmented damage control parties close up mean? Well, the skipper expects trouble and he wants more people down below to close off bulkheads, to get rid of what water is going to be forced into the ship through torpedoes or bombs. My God, I'm suddenly at war.
This was a time of fast-moving and momentous events. In June, the Japanese attacked Sydney Harbour with midget submarines, and HMAS Cuttable, a converted ferry, was sunk.
It wasn't until 11:30, we were still on the upper deck of the old Cuttable, that she was hit by one of the torpedoes.
When it was realised that enemy submarines were in the harbour, all hell broke loose. American and Australian warships firing at will. Amid the confusion, one of the submarines was able to fire her torpedoes.
One went ashore up in the gun mounting store, the wharf, gun mounting wharf, and the second one went under K9 and Dutch submarine was moored alongside us and hit the stone wall and just blew the bottom out of the Cuttable. She sunk in, I think a couple of minutes. I just went over the side and that was the safest place to go, I thought.
19 sailors sleeping aboard Cuttable were killed. Suddenly, the war was very close to home indeed.
I'd been at sea on Canberra and over the UK, and I never thought I'd get torpedoed in Sydney Harbour.
It's thought that 3 midget submarines entered the harbour, One was entangled in boom wires near Watson's Bay and destroyed herself. Another was discovered in Taylor Bay and depth charged. She was found the next morning, her engine still running and her crew dead from self-inflicted wounds. The third was never found. In August 1942, HMAS Canberra, operating with the Americans in the Solomons, was attacked and damaged beyond repair by the Japanese.
Farewell, Canberra. Today she sails no more. Never again will her bows cut through the southern waters of the Australian Bight or navigate the coral reefs of our northern coastline. Although Canberra's duties did not lead her into the Mediterranean zone, the AIF will remember her on escort for their fast convoys to the Middle East. Day and night, year in, year out, her men did their duty. Captain Getting, seen on right, remained at his post in spite of mortal wound.
During the action, an 8-inch shell came in the port side, landed in the shell handling room underneath us above the magazine. Unfortunately for us, it was made in Japan. Otherwise, it would have been the end of the lot of us.
Canberra has gone, but Canberra shall not die. Another shall arise.
Hold the hands, hold the hands, hold the hands. Wakey, wakey, wakey.